Hello, it's good to be able to add my voice to the Ecocentric testimonies curated by Taylor Hood, one of my fellow editors with the online journal, The Ecological Citizen. I appreciate the opportunity to do this. I've written down a few things so I don't forget anything important. In 2019, the journal published a supplement called Becoming Ecocentric. It's still online, and I contributed an article entitled Ecocentrism, My Road Less Traveled, which has a bit more personal detail than I can supply today. I also definitely recommend the short entry on ecocentrism in our series, What Is? I started out life in the Canadian Midwest, then America, before arriving in England and finally London in the 1970s, in my early 20s. Suffice it to say that my route to an ecocentric vision, and perhaps still more importantly, ecocentric values, has been highly individual, even eccentric. But then maybe everybody's is, so that's okay. Let me touch on a few events that stand out. One was the discovery as a teenager in New England that the natural world could be friendly. I was an intellectually adventurous child, but otherwise rather fearful. So after the 4 seasons of Manitoba, summarized by a friend, freeze, flood, fry, and fall, especially freeze, as in 40 degrees below zero quite frequently, and after some time in Africa, where I was for a while, and where a great number of animals seemed ready to sting, claw, bite, or simply eat me, nature as welcoming came as something of a revelation. That discovery coincided with my falling deeply in love with Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, especially the natural world of Middle-earth, its moments of wonder and the elves, rooted in trees and forests. And the upshot, as I wrote in my road article online, was that nature became kind of literary, a sort of great non-anthropocentric art, while literature became natural, completely natural. Another turning point for me was taking the last 2 years of classes taught by the anthropologist and philosopher Gregory Bateson in Santa Cruz, California. From that came another double revelation. First, that mind, sentience, subjectivity, and agency are ecological. That is, they are relational, including, but not confined to, a brain and a body, as if these could, and of course as if these could exist, let alone function without other brains and bodies, a world as well. Secondly, I learned that contrariwise, ecosystems are enminded, ensouled, full of subjects and agents. Note that this sort of realization works by metaphor. This, whatever it may be, is that. You make a connection, or you half make and half perceive a connection. This resonates with another of Bateson's insights, namely, that both the natural world and the human mind, of which it is part, think metaphorically. They both proceed by making new connections in encounters with others, in new and changing conditions. Perhaps the proper meaning of the term bandied about evolution. Hence the titles of Bateson's books, Steps to an Ecology of Mind, and Mind and Nature a Necessary Unity. A classical example of metaphor, and this is on the mind side of things, is Achilles is a lion! Exclamation mark. That is, he is both a human man and a lion. On the nature side, feathers for insulation can also, it turns out, enable flight. An organ for micturition is also one for procreation, and so on. There is even a meta-metaphor linking these two domains. It was encapsulated by William Blake. Quote, "To the eyes of imagination, nature is imagination, or mind, itself." In other words, truly understood, nature itself just is mind, and mind itself just is nature. The final such event for me was encountering the idea of ecocentrism through the pioneering but flawed enterprise of deep ecology, the tiny but admirable Left Bio movement, and the work of people like Richard Sylvan, Val Plumwood, David Abram, Sean Kane, Graham Harvey, Mary Midgley, Ian McGilchrist, Jan Zwicky, Stan Rowe, and Ted Moskin. Some of these contacts eventuated in ongoing friendships, along with my fellow editors at the Ecological Citizen, Joe Gray and Ian White, shortly to be joined by Eileen Christ, Adam Dickerson, Victor Postnikov, Stephanie Moran, and most recently Taylor Hood, a great bunch of people with whom it is an honor to work. Ecocentrism is fundamentally about recognizing and honoring the fact that the living earth, including its creatures, is the absolutely indispensable source and support for all life, and for all that life can do or aspire to do, very much including humans. The relevant contrast is with anthropocentrism, a kind of arrogant, collective narcissism, which involves finding value mostly or even only in human beings, this one species among so many millions. Another way to describe ecocentrism is to say that the earth and our fellow earthlings have not merely instrumental value for what we can do with them and what they are useful to us for, they have intrinsic value for their own sakes, just as we would like to be considered. That value cannot be quantified or commodified or algorithmized. It is precisely invaluable and priceless. It is wild, like nature, and therefore unbiddable. Now the mode of all this, as I've said, is relational. That means it's not primarily about supposed essences like God, the self, being, man, or so on. And we must be careful not to turn nature or the earth into an abstract noun like that. True, the earth does ultimately constitute a whole, but it is made up of an illimitable number and kinds of relations which rightly present themselves as a plurality, and without which there would be no whole. It's also relational for us humans, and in being relational for us humans, the earth, including us, is also ethical for us. Why? Because whenever we are in a relationship, we have an effect on the other of some kind, an effect for which we are responsible, and for which we must take responsibility. So ethics is not something optional or inferior to knowledge or enlightenment. It is already present and important from the beginning. This is a mistake that some deep ecologists used to make, to think otherwise. Particularly important, I think, as Ian White always emphasized, is the ethical injunction, do least harm. My last two books, because after all, I am a writer, have been on the subject of enchantment as a human experience, and its nature, value, and importance. What does that have to do with ecocentrism or nature? Well, compressing madly, wonder, which is the heart of enchantment, is itself fully relational, always enchantment by, wonder at. This means it's an encounter across differences, and as relational and an encounter, it's also ecological, because that's what ecology means, a world of relationships. By the same token, wonder is both fully embodied, and therefore material, and completely intangible or spiritual. Let me try and give you a closer idea of what I mean. Bateson used to ask, where is the difference, and therefore potential relationship, between any two things? Is it in one of them? Is it in the other? Is it in the space between them? No, none of the above. But without the things, the difference between them also wouldn't exist. So neither would the possibility of relationship. It's sometimes forgotten for those advocating union or unity that there cannot be any relationships within a complete unity where there are no differences. Differences separate, but they also relate. Just as importantly, about enchantment, it offers the realization of a very important truth, namely the intrinsic value of the enchanting other, in parallel to the ethical imperative to do least possible harm. This kind of experience, the intrinsic value of another, is only available to an embodied and ecological living being. So enchantment itself is ultimately an experience of life and of being alive, and it affirms that value. Another way to look at it is, it's a fundamentally non-Cartesian experience. It's upstream of any rigid distinction between subjective and objective, mind and body, spirit and matter, and so on. We are trained and often forced to think that way. But as the philosopher Wittgenstein wrote, physiological life is, of course, not life, and neither is psychological life. Life is the world. Probably my most personal contribution, if not necessarily original, to the idea and practice of ecocentrism is that without this universal yet intimately personal experience of the natural world and in the natural world, inspiring love of it, and therefore the desire and courage to resist its destruction, without that, even relatively enlightened political policies, ecological programs in economics, sustainable economies, all the rest of this will fail. Something that follows, which is relevant, is what I think of as the Enchantment Paradox. It's a bit uncomfortable. If we only value the natural world for its use value to us humans, and not all humans of course, rather than ecocentrically for its own wondrous sake, then we will fail on that count too. Even valuing nature because we need it in order to survive won't suffice. Only a personal realization, individual and collective, of the wonder of nature will really do. In the meantime, as you may have noticed, the human world is, even for it, unusually insane. The government is, a very important government, is currently talking up, not talking about reducing, oil and gas. Meanwhile, some other people not content with mere climate denialism are saying that Greens started the recent forest fires in order to further their own radical agenda. This is armor-plated insanity. So what can ecocentrics do? At a minimum, I think, set out our stall and try and make our voices heard. Not because that will result in a green revolution or a new eco-millennium, but simply in order to ensure that the conversations taking place and the spectrum of possibilities they are about don't only stretch from full-blown anthropocentrism at one end to well-intentioned, moderate, sensible anthropocentrism at the other end, which, after a slightly longer run, will have exactly the same result as the first option. Rather, the other end of the spectrum of conversations needs to be the sanity of unashamed ecocentrism. Because if the most progressive option is not valuing nature for her own sake, but making the minimum possible concessions in order to protect business as usual in all respects, then we really are doomed. And not only us, of course, but nearly all the innocent non-human others who are still left. My closing advice for those who have fought and are still fighting what has been described as the long defeat, I will borrow from one of the rare voices of sanity, who saw clearly the terminus of disenchanted anthropocentric modernity, and commended the virtues of courage in a tight spot, even when there's no hope, and solidarity despite differences. Quote, "There is naught you can do other than to resist, with hope or without it. But you don't stand alone. And despair is only for those who see the end beyond any doubt. We don't."